Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Prolix, Comics, Bollix, the show where myself, Nick, and himself,
Robert the Great.
Robert the Great, yes, discuss sequential art. What you rubes would know as comic books.
Hey, Rube!
So yes, so it's my choice this episode.
Was Rube Goldberger a Rube? Was that his real name? Was he identifying as a non-carny? Or is it short for Ruben? Or
probably short for Ruben, I'm guessing.
Okay.
But you know what? Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. You'd think somebody who invented those wonky machines, but then yeah, that's more of a carny thing than a non-carny thing. So
he was still alive. I mean, he'd have endless fun watching those videos on YouTube, right?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely.
I got up my game. It's not enough just to catch the mouse at the end of the board game. Did you have the Mousetrap board game?
Mousetrap, yes.
Yeah, which actually was a crap board game, other than
that
at the end. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I did another one that was much better called Run Rabbit Run, I think it was called, and it had what I liked about it was one of those ones where the board came with one of those pressed down dice things.
Oh, pop-o-matic dice.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
those things are one of the greatest things that ever came out of human civilization.
Agreed. Yes.
I remember removing one from some game, and then that made reading the Fighting Fantasy books better rather than throwing a dice. Yeah.
Nice. So anyway, what we're here to talk about is.
Are we not? Is this not the dice appreciation show?
No.
Sorry,
that's another show we do, Clive.
Right.
That's one of the 800
we'll get
shows that we do. Yeah. So no, we're going to talk about a one-shot manga written and illustrated by Shigeru Mizuki, called "Onward Towards Our Noble Deaths." And there's perfect. There's a copy of the paper version. I've got the Kindle version.
By our old friends at Drawn and Quarterly, who
yes.
What else did we? Was it?
They did the Drifting Life fella, Tatsumi.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, and also probably maybe, but because they're Canadian, so they're well known for having published
that one.
All Chester Brown's stuff.
Yes. So there we go. We've done quite a bit of Drawn and Quarterly stuff.
Well, yeah, and they'll show up again for sure. Because was going to mention off air, but forgot to. But Joe Matt, the creator of Peep Show, passed away quite recently, within the last few weeks, and at quite a young age. Really, he's not that much older than we are. And so.
Really? He's still in his late 20s. That's remarkable.
He is, yeah. No, it was anyway. There was quite a lot of folks, Robin Bougie and Gareth Gowden and other people in the comics orbit in Canada who I'm friends with. Who there was quite a long. Everyone, Ed, you remember Ed? I think you brought him up a few times in our last episode and made outrageous.
Yes,
outrageous calumny and lies.
Isn't he locked up yet?
That's anyway, so yeah, everyone had kind of was
blot on comics, I tell you, that man.
Anyway, a lot of people were sad to hear that he passed. So because for a while on our reading list has been his Peep Show comics, and I think you'll, well, who knows, you might hate them, but I suspect not. I suspect you might enjoy them.
Okay. Anytime you pull the trigger on that one, we can do that. Yeah,
we will. I think probably sooner than later. But yeah, so anyway, what do you know about Mizuki Shigeru there, Clive?
Well, I did know about this manga because my wife is a big fan of it, and I remember a few years back she had been I think she borrowed it in I think in Japanese form it's in a few volumes, right? I think she rented it from the local library, And yeah, I remember she was telling me about it, and you know, that's how he lost his arm and all that. And so, but in general, MIZUKI, so it's funny. Obviously, he's most famous for the Gegege no Kitaro, which, as far as I know, has never been given like an English name, is it? I think Gegege no Kitaro is known.
It's fascinating that, like, yeah, it's always just been left in its Japanese, and I've never read it. I've only seen the 1968 black and white anime.
Okay, right. Well, this is interesting then, because this is I thought this was something that was different. I thought this was a blind spot of mine and not yours, but and I'm wondering if it's the same thing with you. So Gegege no Kitaro is so prevalent and famous here in Japan.
Yeah, they remake it every couple of years as a TV series.
And if you don't know, it's about yokai, you know, it's about folklore and demons and things, and the main character is this kid with one empty eye socket, which he puts his dead father's eyeball in, which, you know, actually, when you say it, you're like, strange. Why the fuck have I not read this? But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you might have had the same thing with me about it, is because it's so ubiquitous and because it's kind of aimed at children as well. I kind of put it in the same category as that kind of omnipresent thing like Doraemon or Detective Conan, or which actually probably is quite good stuff, but just because it's so everywhere, you just kind of you put it off or whatever, and you don't actually tend to get round to it. But certainly after reading this, I was thinking, you know, I probably really need to actually sit down.
I think I do too. I really think so. And I think Drawn and Quarterly has actually done, they've been doing an English like run of it. And because the thing is, whenever I see pages reprinted of it, it's beautifully drawn. Like, it's truly gorgeous looking. And it just makes me think that it's, you know, and actually what I want to read is Nonoba, right? Which is his story about the old lady who kind of took care of him as a kid and told him all of the stories. And
there's really also the other adjacent one is the Akuma-kun series, right? It was slightly less popular than the Gegege no Kitaro, but dealing with similar stuff. Actually, I might even try. I mean, it might be a bit of a challenge, but I'm assuming it's a shonen manga as opposed to a seinen manga. So, would maybe the collected tankobons have furigana?
Yeah, possibly.
So I might try, rather than fork out for I like supporting Drawn. I might see, because obviously that's the cheapest chips here and easy to find. I might see if I can challenge to read.
Go to Book Off and see if you can find
get, like the collected, you know, for like 100 yen or something.
Right.
Just because I do need to find ways of keeping my Japanese language study fresh, and for some reason I never thought about that, because whenever I've tried that in the past, because usually you have to start off with the shonen stuff, rather it's usually the less you know, because I want to read the Gekiga and the older stuff, right? But no, Kitaro might be one of the few, because I didn't really get on with Dragon Ball that well necessarily, although I might have to try that again one day. But Gegege no Kitaro might be the thing I stick with, so there we go.
Funny enough, I read and I bought a bilingual version, but I remember it definitely did have the furigana. Was Devilman.
Yes, I've read Devilman in the Japanese as well, exactly because of that. It does have the furigana, because it is technically shonen, right? It's
even though it doesn't seem like it. Not kid stuff. So this though, I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to read this was because a while ago, I think one of your choices was Charlie's War, right? Pat Mills, British comic.
That is Charlie's War.
Beautiful. And then Joe, I can't remember how to say his last name, but it's Colquhoun or whatever it is. The guy who drew it, you know, gorgeous black and white. Colquhoun, maybe, yeah.
I think you know of the two of us.
Yes, but I wasn't a huge war comics guy as a kid. I was much more
unlike me,
more comedy stuff. You know, I read some stuff.
Yeah,
But,
I was a War Comics kid. I'm gonna have to bring that in at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, I remember just thinking at the time it kind of tickled this memory of I'd always wanted to read this, right? So this is.
Had you not read this before then?
No. This was a first read for me.
I thought you were
I
back to an old favorite.
No, I might have read. No, even then I don't think so. So Frederick Schott, or however you say his name, Schott. Had a book.
I think his name is Frederick.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes. He had that book, his kind of the manga book or whatever it was from way back. Like it's.
I never read it, but it is
it's like the first serious, kind of treatment. And then in the end of it,
he does the intro to this as well. We should mention.
Yes, yeah. And so he had, but I don't think so. I think actually it's funny. I think it's actually it's a Matsumoto Leiji comic, the war comic from one of his Cockpit episodes. I think is in the end of that, because there's a chunk of that book which was just like, here, I'm just going to translate some stuff for you because none of it was available in English back then. So he would just take like 30 pages out of like Rose of Versailles and then like a short story by this person and that person, and then just translate them himself. But what I'm remembering is that there's a final image in this of the kind of stand-in character for Mizuki who's dying on the beach, right? And that image is in the book. I remember it arresting me back when I was 19 or 20, when I first read the book at art school. A friend of mine had it and lent it to me. And I was like, "Oh, like what the like that looks really intense."
This is the shop book.
This is the shop book, yeah. If I'm not, I don't think I'm misremembering this. I'm pretty sure that picture, which I think is quite famous, of him lying on his side, kind of dying on the beach, is reproduced in the book. And then there's an explanation about the book and about just generally about Mizuki's career.
So what is the book about then? What is the comic, we should say, about Nick?
So it is like a 90% true.
That's what he says, 90% true.
Version of his experiences in the Second World War in Papua New Guinea, where
Rabino, right? Is that what it's called, the place?
Yeah. Very near the end of the war. So we do get moments where the other Japanese soldiers who are increasingly depressed and frustrated and sort of like recognizing that this is a complete disaster. Japan itself is being bombed, right? And so they're like, what are we doing? Right. What are we doing here in Papua New Guinea?
A fairly useless piece of land, right? Out in the middle of nowhere.
While at home.
New Britain, it was called in those days, right?
And there was a New Ireland, which is what I found on the map. I was like, what the hell? New Ireland off of the Papua New Guinea.
Just as good as the old one.
Yes, exactly.
With added cannibals.
Did you so there's a really, really good story or whatever article on the Comix Journal about his career, his life, right around the time he passed away.
Okay, no, I haven't read this. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Okay, so I just read it like earlier today.
Are you a subscriber? Is that available to non-subscribers?
So I'm not. So I mean, this is this is obviously the website, but in the old days, I don't know if it still is published as an actual like magazine or book, but it used to be published.
It is again now. Yeah, it is again now. Okay, it wasn't for a while, and then it reverted back to a print.
Okay, a paper version. Yeah,
I've read some of the recent ones. It's still a great.
I loved it. Back in my teenage and later years, I had a bunch of copies I would just buy from the comic book store, like back issues and stuff. I have an issue that has a great interview with Brian Boland in it, and anyway.
How about that evil man Ed Brisson? Has he ever been interviewed in the comics?
That's a great question. He might have been. I don't know.
Did they touch on the issues, the concerns?
But anyway, so yeah, in this, it does it does a pretty good job of outlining his career. So he was drafted, right?
Right.
He did not choose to go. And then basically, it says here, the draft notice was a psychological shock. And I guess his daughters had just found some diaries that he'd been writing as a young man at the point at which he was facing being sent. So at the age of 20, he wrote, 50 to 100,000 men are dying in this war every day. Of what point are the arts? Of what point is religion? We aren't even permitted to contemplate these things. To be a painter or a philosopher or a scholar of letters, all that's needed are laborers now. This is an age painted with the earth tones of graveyards, an age of buried humanity where people are just lumps under the earth. I sometimes think being alive at this time is the only thing worse than death, because everything of worth has been discarded. What remains is violence, political authority. That's what kills us. I have no more capacity for tears. My only relief is to lose myself in music, in painting. I turn pale at the thought of war, but that's how I win. He apparently was a terrible soldier, completely unfit for duty, it says. His commanding officer recognized this and, trying to save his life, assigned him to the bugle corps. But Mizuki hated playing the bugle. And
pleasing some people, I tell you.
I know. Well, in what he now calls the greatest mistake of his life, he demanded to be released from trumpeting duty and sent somewhere warm.
Right.
And he got his wish.
Yeah, he certainly did. Yeah.
So this book basically takes up at the point he's been sent to Papua New Guinea to defend a useless lump of land in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it is a real damning indictment of just totally out of control militarism, right? I mean, it's farcical from the get-go and just piled. It's funny, I was actually talking to someone in the past couple of days about, I'd been reading this, and there's a tone to it, because there's some heinous shit in this manga, but it's almost always delivered with a slight, like almost like a tongue-in-cheek. There's always like a comedic element. The fact that the main characters are drawn in a cartoonish way, kind of, but it's interesting. It reminded me, it's got that real survivors, PTSD. The only way I can deal with this is to laugh at it tone that
blackest of the black humor.
Like Kurt Vonnegut has.
Yes.
Like in his writing, but especially if you ever see Kurt Vonnegut like interviewed, or you're clearly seeing a man kind of barely keeping it together, using this kind of we've talked before about. I'm wondering if Charles Willeford might have had a bit of that as well, and he loves quoting the opening of Scaramouche, paraphrasing, but he learned long ago that the world was just a fucking sewer, and you just laughed at Timothy Carey as well had a similar quote. So there's that element of it, right, where he clearly at a certain point he's just, in a way, it saved him, hasn't he? That he's lost. Like, I mean, look at the man. I mean,
I know.
He looks so, but it's that kind of cheerfulness, which is, if I'm not this cheerful, then I'm just gonna dissolve into a miasma of, because I've seen the worst.
But that humanity has to offer it.
And he clearly has mainly escaped into this land of folklore and fantasy. And it's interesting. There's a brief interview with him at the end of this as well. He says, like, even.
Yeah, it's great. It's so terse. His answers are like, the questions are this long, and his answers sentence.
Yeah. But it clearly it's still something. This was, the rage comes bubbling up if he goes anywhere near. It's interesting that he would go back quite often to the island.
Well, this comes up actually in the article. So maybe we should talk a little bit more about what actually happened in the book, and then we'll talk about
there's a novel idea.
The truth of what so basically, I mean, it begins really with him, like, he's one of the new recruits, right? He's one of the, so that, and there's that kind of like that pecking order, senpai kohai thing right away, right? And clearly the military,
new recruits are like tatami mats. The more you beat them, the better they are, right?
Yes, yeah, and then because more than a year passes and they're still treated like absolute shit. Like there doesn't seem to be a point at which they graduate out of being the
every few seconds, right? Like poof,
Yeah, they're
flattened around,
constantly
yeah.
battered around, and then as you were saying, like, so in just the kind of the fiercely hierarchical nature of the Japanese military at this time, right? And then clearly, so their captain or whatever is this like young guy who's in love with this sort of like 300 style like obviously it's an old samurai tale about like some guy who held off much larger forces with a tiny, and he's
Right.
He's on a death trip. He's obsessed with this idea of this grand suicide mission, and the whole story, you just see it coming, like it's like a car crash in slow motion from almost page one of like, we're going to get to this point where he's going to order all of his men to die for no good reason.
Right.
And then we get to that point, right? And this did really happen. So the only thing that's made up is that the stand-in for Mizuki, Shigeru, dies.
Yeah. In the yeah.
In the book,
he came this close to dying and lost an arm, right?
Well, yeah, apparently he was in hospital at the end of well, basically like during the war. He had so yeah, okay, so he had malaria. He was recuperating in hospital. The doctors had basically said, we need to stop feeding him and giving him medicine because he's going to die for sure. And so apparently he jumped out of his bed like a zombie and proceeded to eat everything in sight, convincing the doctors to give him another chance. But like within a day or two, a bomb was dropped on the hospital, and that's when he lost his arm.
Right.
And not just his arm, his fucking drawing arm.
Right. Yeah.
Which is, for me, one of the most amazing things about his life is that he taught himself to draw with his other arm and drew the tens of thousands of pages of beautifully illustrated comics he did. Yeah. I mean, like, just this guy's,
Take that, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Exactly. You and your foot.
Yeah.
And so, so what's interesting, I guess we'll just get ahead of it anyway. So apparently in real life, the next thing that actually happened to him was he wandered into a local village. He was starving, his arms gone, like at the thing,
at the thing.
Sorry?
The thing. Are you going to identify that part of the body further, or will that do?
So no, I guess he'd had his
elbow, I believe is the word you're looking for.
He's had his arm basically sawed off, I think, like that. So it was wrecked by the bomb, right? And so he's got his arm. His arm's been cut off, and he's. I
suppose we're lucky we got the arm out of you. The thing was loose at the thing.
And apparently, so he wandered into this village of Tolai tribespeople from Papua New Guinea. And he started eating all of their food because he was like starving and hallucinating or whatever. And instead of being angry, the local family was amused by this and kind of adopted him.
Yeah. I suppose he's lucky as well. And this isn't me being racist. I mean, these were the times. I suppose he's lucky that the cauldron didn't come out, right? Because that is.
Yeah, it's Papua New Guinea, for sure.
Documented. A delicious snack. He probably didn't have a meat on him actually to be firing up the cauldron, right? Like
right. Yeah, he was in a bad way. So apparently he became like very close friends to this guy called Tope Toro, who became his lifelong friend. And then he wrote a book in 1995 called 50 Years with Tope Toro. And he became so well known in Papua New Guinea that he has a road named after him there.
Okay.
And so there's a road named after him in Japan as well.
Yes, well, there's a whole town, right? There's the town he grew up in, which if you go there, it's like something similar, I would imagine, to the small town just outside of somewhere in Aomori, where Dazai Osamu was from. Is
right.
Yeah, it's basically just Osamu Town, right?
Right.
I think Mizuki's hometown is like that. Like anything you could possibly imagine turned into a
a shrine to him.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. So
Right.
I'd actually quite like to go there. I have to admit, I've never been there, but
So apparently, he planned to stay there. He wasn't going to go back to Japan
okay.
because he was so fucked off with what had just happened to him. And but the local doctor told him that he was going to die because apparently the amputation was sort of botched because it was done by the local dentist,
Okay.
and it was going to take several operations to stabilize, and he had to go back and go to Japan for the operations.
Also, apparently, as he was, fattening up and gaining health, he saw them polishing the cauldron.
Yeah, it did give him pause. Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, he goes back to Japan and begins his career as a manga artist and creates Gegege no Kitaro. But eventually, he decides it's time to put this shit on paper as well. And I guess at a time when people weren't, this
I
this
don't
book
think it was a hit, was it? When
75 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then apparently he did his Showa series kind of more in the 80s when like the bubble is happening and everyone's like, oh, Japan, we're all happy now, and he's like, nah, here's this.
When this came out, had they found that Anoda guy yet? It must have been about the same time, right? That discovered him. So it would, it would have been a history very much, wanting to be forgotten very, very quickly, right? Heaped dirt upon, right? Yeah, we'll forget about that particular chapter because that's not one of our best. Not us at our best, right? Yeah. So I'm not quite sure how much people were ready to be reminded of it. Really,
I wouldn't think so. And apparently he was very vocal whenever there were kind of right-wing politicians and stuff who were saber rattling or talking about again changing the constitution all along. Apparently he would go out and salute them mockingly with his missing arm as a like fuck you,
right?
So yeah, I do appreciate.
No, he definitely seems like he was one of the good guys, right? He died 3-4 years ago, I think.
Yes, yeah. He had a fall at home. I mean, he's this is good. You probably enjoy this. He felt life was precious and happiness was the only thing worth living for. So you're kind of saying like this grinning, he was like, because he had these experiences so young, he decided, fuck it, I'm just going to enjoy every day just like he was an Epicurean through and through. To Mizuki, the 7 deadly sins were only signs of a body in good working order. In Dreamland, Japan, Shod recalls seeing Mizuki in San Francisco in 1993, returning from an arduous research trip in Hopi Indian Territory in Arizona. Already in his 70s, Mizuki exuded vitality. While his younger companions were exhausted by a late night of dinner and drinking, Mizuki wanted to go to a local porn store and check out girly mags. As someone who had cheated death so many times, Mizuki didn't want to waste a second of being alive. In his 90s, his Twitter feed was full of pictures of himself sucking down McDonald's French fries like he was receiving communion. In his 90s.
He was a big fan of his food. I mean, you would, right, after an experience like this. I mean, I'm not going hungry.
Well, it's funny. I mean, he kind of almost makes fun of himself though, because he's constantly obsessing about like getting enough bananas, or they're digging up papaya roots and stuff like that. And like somebody's like, oh, they're kind of like daikon if you cook them for long enough. And
yeah. The other thing I should mention before I forget as well, in terms of, okay, that's a book I need to get, and I'm sure this probably jumped out at you as well. Speaking of in the short intro, he mentions this book by a guy called Eric P. Nash, the navishly illustrated Manga Kamishibai collection. And there's something I wasn't familiar with. Kamishibai was like a kind of street, like a paper theater, right? It was like a run of manga where they would like have illustrations on the street and someone like tell a story.
Tell a story and they just change that.
A bit like I'm guessing a bit like a Punch and Judy kind of.
Yeah.
And there's this book, Manga Kamishibai, The Art of Japanese Paper Theater. Again, one of those things you probably should have jumped on when it was new, because now it's getting quite expensive slowly. So I might bite the bullet and buy it now before it costs me also an arm. to have to buy a copy. So, but that sounds like something that would probably fit the remit of this show as well.
Totally.
Sounds fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to mention that because the intro is really good. It's a very good translation, as I was mentioned by Zach did. Who's also translated some of other. I should say
Zach wrote the article that
I've
been quoting from the Comics Journal,
and he translated the Showa manga as well that he did, right? I don't know if he did the because there's a few like you said, some of the Giga stuff. The Hitler biography did of all things. That's been translated. I don't know what that yeah. But no, this is a great. I mean, this is fantastic. Again, Drawn and Quarterly have done a fantastic job with it as well. I mean, I don't know what more this is. I mean, it kind of speaks. It is a war is hell story. I mean, you should probably know that by now. You're not necessarily going to read this and go, "Oh, hang on, war isn't much fun." I mean, but it's such a. I mean, it's such a. The art style. We should talk about the art style as well because it is this weird mix of very pared down, like cartoonish, almost like Beano Dandy level main.
Yeah, Beetle. It's a Beetle Bailey,
right?
Kind of, almost, exactly. But then as a
photorealist background.
But that is a generally Japanese kind of a thing, right? It's not.
I'm wondering, was he a pioneer of that? Like, how far?
That's a good question.
Did that go?
Yeah, that is a good question because like the scenes of the jungle are so lavishly, like every frigging leaf. Is
almost to the point there was because there's some. I don't know exactly what the process is, but I have some comics here, where there's clearly been some sort of tracing or something has been involved in drawing like cityscapes. And I was looking at this as first, and some of it's so well drawn. I was like, "Is that?" But if you look at it, even if some of the like ships and military stuff, like even if that is in some way, kind of if has been traced over.
The
thing is that beyond that though. Where you look, you're like, oh no, like some of the cross hatching and like you're like, oh no, some of this stuff can't. It must have been drawn. So there's like, he might even have just hand drawn the whole stuff.
I mean, what's
interesting is even if it's a crossover, it doesn't matter because it kind of bleeds in, and the way it's integrated is so skillful that you wouldn't even consider it so-called cheating if he had.
No. And I mean, to be honest, the Lightbox has long been a friend of artists, of all kinds of comic artists.
There's sometimes in some Japanese erotic comics I have actually where they've gone for it like so strong. Sometimes it just feels a little bit like, I don't know. You might as well have just put a photo in there or something.
Yes, sure.
Right.
But like no, but like when he does so, I mean, there's images like this.
Yeah, exactly.
That are kind of like they're almost like Dürer prints, like they're like a you know what I mean? Like they look like, and then you get to this kind of this mix of like where you've got both. You've got the kind of the comic booky stuff, and then the less,
right,
and then something like this, which seems like comic booky, but also it's also very grim. You know what I mean?
That looks like a Kitaro panel, actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like there's this the use of the songs throughout. I thought was really effective. Like these kind of
they haven't really. I don't expect them to, but no one's ever really overcome that weird gap between, on the one hand, like translating it accurately, but then also making it into something that you could sing. Like you couldn't sing song the English in this. It just doesn't.
No, it wouldn't work. Yeah,
it doesn't read right. But you get the point.
I think the other thing it reminded me a little bit of was and it's well, you mentioned Kurt Vonnegut, so obviously Slaughterhouse-Five jumps to mind, right? The Dresden scenes are so you know, harsh in that book. But then that walking that line of like where it's like pitch black, but there is this weird humor in there, was actually Celine's first book, the one where he talks about his World War I experiences, Journey to the End of the Night.
Kettle of Jam.
Yes,
right.
That's the one. And there are some scenes in this that absolutely
very
brought
Kettle of Jam. Yeah,
feeling
that's
back.
a phrase we should adopt. That's very Kettle of Jam. Yeah.
And those in the know will have a shudder of
because that is such a great, that's one of those great, I remember reading that and just like, oh yeah, that's bang on.
God.
Kettle of Jam.
Yeah, and so I mean that's the thing, because it moves from this kind of like, and then it's just, you know, the weirdness of being in a world where on the one hand, you know, one moment you're just kind of pissed off because somebody slapped you, or you know, one of my favorite things is actually that scene where I don't remember how shit ends up in the rice bucket exactly.
Right.
You know, but it does.
Things happen.
Yes. And then they end up making rice, and it ends up being browner rice than maybe it should. And then he's hoping to feed it, because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of like really like, you can see if that is who Mizuki is, that he definitely is a rabble rousing fuck you. You know, yeah, you know, he's definitely yeah, he's not going along with the plan
or something at some point as well, doesn't he? And
yeah, he takes whatever tiny bits of revenge he can, or salvages whatever bits of dignity he's able to in the situation. But anyway, you know, the joke is obviously he ends up having to eat the rice himself. And
no, but it does. It's not. Yeah, it somehow it does feel. It very much. It just amplifies the farcical and petty nature of everything. Right? It's of a piece. Right? It doesn't seem stupid.
Right.
It's not like total whiplash. It's like
no, not at all.
Yeah. No. But anyway. Very good.
Yes.
You should march onward towards your noble reading of this comic, I would say.
Yes. Agreed. I'm glad this was one where this turned out well.
Yes.
Yeah, because this I hadn't read this before, and I'm very glad that I did. And I think it would make an interesting thing to pair. If you're going to recommend what are some war comics you should read, if you were not looking for the feel good rah-rah.
No.
Then this and Charlie's War are, I think, both.
And then if you want cheering up, get some Battle Picture Library or Commando or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Doc, then that's us for this time.
Mm-hmm.
We shall have more sequential art coming at you next time.
Mm-hmm.
Until next time, bye.